Hello, everybody. This is a brief introduction to the coursework element of English Language and Literature A-Level. Okay, so we refer to it as the NEA. That stands for the Non-Examined Assessment, but it is just another word for coursework. It's worth 20% of the A-Level mark, and it's an essential way of allowing students to demonstrate additional skills beyond the exam. So for this A-Level, that really means being able to demonstrate your skills in creative writing, both fiction and non-fiction. So let's have a look at what the specification says is involved. They're going to ask you to produce two pieces of writings, two pieces of original writing, one piece of fiction, one piece of creative non-fiction, and they're going to ask you to come up with a commentary to go with that. The commentary is going to reflect on the studied text and the piece of writing they have produced. This needs to be a substantial piece of work. It's worth 20% of your A-level, so they're going to want to see plenty of detail. So it's strongly recommended that students write between 1,500 and 2,000 words for their fiction and creative non-fiction pieces, and 1,000 to 1,250 words for their commentaries. We will encourage you to be writing at the upper end of that limit, so at least 1,000 words for each of your original writing pieces, and 1,250 for the commentary. Now, it's really important that you go to that level because you want to be able to demonstrate to the examiner the range of skills that you've got, and the fewer words you use, the more you're going to limit the opportunities for demonstrating that range of skills. It's important to note that things like bibliography footnotes are not included in the word count, so don't worry too much about those. In summary, then, it's 1,000 words per piece, and it's 1,250 words for the commentary. So that brings you to a total of 3,250. The exam board do allow a kind of 5 to 10% buffer. So if you were to go slightly over that, then they certainly wouldn't be bothered by that. Okay, so what I would encourage you to do is I'm going to whiz through some of the details in this PowerPoint, but you should find that there are two or three files available in the file section of Teams to do with the coursework and NEA content, and you'll find that one of those is labeled NEA specification. And what I've done is I've taken from the full specification for the A-level the pages which just relate to the coursework. If you don't have access to that file for whatever reason and you're looking at this at a later date, then by all means just go to the website of Pearson, go and look at the specification and look at pages 26 to 38, and that will give you the bones of what we're talking about here. So in terms of planning what we do and working out how to take some next steps, things that we need to be focusing on, students will need to select a topic that will help to frame their investigation and provide adequate scope for from which to find examples of fiction and non-fiction texts. So what that means is when you're looking at different types of writing, investigating different styles of writing, you begin to develop your own writing. They want all of that to be framed around a particular theme or topic. This can be really, really broad. So don't worry too much about that because there's lots of ways in which we can stitch those together. We're going to have a look at those. The texts studied can act as a direct stimulus for students' own writing or as style models. So this is really important. One of the things that you've got to do, and we're going to spend some time talking about this in a bit of detail in this little presentation, is you've got to engage with a variety of different types of writing. And that means you need to do plenty of reading. So we need to be reading fiction and non-fiction. I'm going to go through some examples of those in a bit. But what you can do with that is either just use it as a stimulus for your own writing or as a style model. So a style model is where you look at a specific type of writing and you really try and copy the features of that writer. So for example, I had a fantastic piece of coursework from a student this year who did her own version of a section of a Jane Austen novel. So she loved Jane Austen, she'd read lots of Jane Austen, she really understood the way in which Jane Austen wrote, and she created a pastiche of a piece of Jane Austen's writing, which was really original. It was entirely new because it was entirely her own work. It was entirely different to the other books that Jane Austen's written, but it was so clearly and effectively in her style that it was using Jane Austen as a style model. You don't have to do it that way, but that can be a really effective way of using stimulus texts. You may use it in just to provide stimulus for your own piece of writing in a more general way, But whichever way you do it, you're going to have to talk about it in some detail in the commentary. Students will be required to reflect on the influence of their studied text and the accompanying commentaries. So that means that you've got to be able to talk about the way in which the books that you have read, the stimulus texts that you have chosen, have shaped your writing. Students' chosen text should be supplemented by wider reading of literary and non-literary sources, which will be explored as background research for the chosen area of investigation. So that means that you should have a variety of books and articles and things that you have read and looked at to provide you with additional insights and additional ideas about your writing. Text studied for examination purposes should not be chosen as non-exam assessment text. So in other words, you can't use anything that we're doing in the exam. More details of all this are in another file, A-Level Langley Coursework Guidance, which again is either in the Teams folder files or it's in, ask your teacher about it and you should be able to get access to it. Okay, so let's dig into some of those kinds of texts in a bit more detail. So what are the kinds of texts, what are the kinds of things they're hoping you're going to engage with by way of stimulus reading? So the two texts should be complete text published in their own rights as books. So for short stories, a collection such as the best short stories of Edgar Allan Poe, rather than a single short story such as the Telltale Heart. For non-fiction, where journalism is chosen, for example, students need to select a published collection such as the Bedside Guardian, 2015, rather than a single article from the Guardian. So they want to see a range of material. They want to see that you've looked at more than just one thing, that you've pushed it, that you've explored a variety. Any text on the specification that has not been studied elsewhere on the specification, or text of similar quality. So what that means is that there are a lot of books, we do Wuthering Heights and a Romantic Poetry Collection, but there are a lot of other books in paper 2, and there are a lot of other drama texts in paper 1 that we don't study. And any of those are entirely acceptable as stimulus texts. So for example, you could look at other writers, other texts by those writers. You could look at other writers on the specification. So we don't do Angela Carter, but she's been very popular in the past. You could look at other writers of that time period. So looking at Jane Eyre, looking at Dickens, there's lots of different examples. Two texts by the same writer, text in translation. So two texts by the same writer, text in translation. So you could look at examples of Dostoevsky or Gogol or Russian writers, which can be really engaging, really interesting. So avoid texts that are on GCSE specifications. Now, this is a little bit unfair, I think, because there are some great texts that are on GCSE specifications. But what they're trying to do is to get you to push further than you would have done at GCSE, to go further, to dig deeper, to look at more demanding texts. And that's a little bit unfair, but you know, we're playing a game here and they set the rules, so we have to do what they say. And avoid populist texts, which are unlikely to be rich style models. So they mean here texts like Twilight or Hunger Games, the kind of things which are not considered to be great examples of writing, even though they have been very successful in terms of book sales. So let's have a quick look at the different types of writing that you might engage in. So in terms of fiction, you could be doing a short story. That's something that's self-contained and there's a clear beginning, a middle, and an end. You could be doing a chapter from a novel. That's very popular. So a lot of my students have done that many times. Looking at a particular genre of writing, have dug into, you know, dystopian fiction or gothic fiction, and then have produced a piece of writing that matches that style very, very clearly. It could be a screenplay extract. Could be a fictionalized diary entry. So it's really important to make very clear the difference between fiction and non-fiction. So a fictionalized diary entry might be something like Gogol's Diary of a Madman, or it might be something like the Diary of Adrian Mole. These things which are clearly not the diary of a real person. Additional chapters, scenes for stimulus text. So what happens next? So you might take, for example, I had a really good student who produced a fictionalized diary of Mrs. Rochester before she got married to Mr. Rochester from Jane Eyre. So that's a really good example of looking at the story, looking at characters of text you know well, and then thinking, well, what happened before this story started? Or what happened after this story ended? And that can be really effective. Short radio play, monologues, again, that can work really well with fiction. Creative nonfiction. So we're talking here about something which is written in the now, written in the present, written as a piece of non-fiction. So journalism, articles. We've had lots of people doing really, really good articles where you've looked at an issue, looked at a debate, looked at tackling a topic which a lot of people will know something about, and then dug deeper into it. So it might be anything you like, from adoption to running a business to social issues around poverty, or around gender, or around education. There's loads and loads and loads of things. People writing about religion. There's lots and lots of things that can work really, really well. Travel writing. So travel writing is really a style of writing where obviously you're writing about a place that you've traveled to, but you're trying to give a different perspective on that. So just writing a piece of just doing a piece of writing about somewhere that you've been that everybody knows isn't very exciting, isn't very effective. But writing about somewhere from a different perspective, showing people that they don't really know the place as well as they think they do, or going somewhere where not many people have been before, or doing something, traveling in a way which not many people have traveled before, or exploring some kind of perspective about that place that other people may not understand and may not see. That's key to successful travel writing. Memoir, biography, documentaries, reviews, all of those. Reviews, another one, very, very popular with students, very, very effective, and can be done really, really well. So think about what are the kinds of writing that you find engaging, interesting, what kind of things would stimulate you on that list. Let's have a look at some examples from the exam board of groups of coursework items. So remember, we said that there's got to be a topic that links them all. So for this first one, somebody's gone for family relationships, and they've used a stimulus text, Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, and King Lear by Shakespeare. And for non-fiction, they've got The Dark Quartet and The Boy with a Top Knot, which is a really well-known memoir. And then they've produced a couple of pieces of writing which reflect that. So letters, feature article. Next one, Secrets and Lies. So The Crucible by Arthur Miller, very popular play, very successful play. Chronicle of a Death Foretold. And then Reading Lolita in Tehran and Nothing to Envy. And again, pieces of fiction based around that, articles around drug trafficking. And you can see that Secrets and Lies, that ties the whole thing together. But the actual two pieces of writing are quite different. Here's another one on journeys, Life of Pi, which was made into a very successful film. Lost Continent, a lot of people use Bill Bryson. So Bill Bryson's very accessible, very popular as a non-fiction writer. It's absolutely worth having a look at some of his material because it can provide you with some good jumping off points for your own writing. You know, a non-fiction article for a student magazine about advantages and disadvantages of a gap year, and then pairing that with a short story about a woman telling her granddaughter about emigrating to Britain. So both of those are about journeys, but they're quite different. They're quite different perspectives on the topic. Entrapment, The Collector. Again, that's a very well-known, very successful writer. John Fowles. He's very dense, very complex, but very engaging, and absolutely worth having a look at. The Yellow Wallpaper, again, a very effective piece of writing, and many of you may have looked at that around themes to do with madness. Evil Cradling, excellent book, much, much better, in my humble opinion, than the other piece of writing by the person who was a prisoner in John McCarthy. There we go, came to me. Evil Cradling is by the Irish writer Brian Keenan. It's not very long, but it's very, very profound. It's very, very effective, and it really sticks with you. So looking at these kinds of pieces of writing and looking at the way in which the writer can get right underneath the surface of a topic and really dig in and give you something that you know, specific techniques you can look at, but really leave you with a sense of this is something that has a very strong voice, has a very profound piece of writing. War and Conflict. So Kurt Vonnegut is very funny, very dark, very absolutely worth looking at. Jeremy Byrne, of course, is a well-known BBC Middle East editor, very famous writer, very well-known again. And you can see the kind of topics that they're working with here. And then Image and Identity, Gatsby, Death of a Salesman, Motorcycle Diaries. These are all texts which are really, really well-known, really worth having a look at. So you get the picture here. You need to read a lot. You need to dig deep. big advantage that you've got now is that there's lots and lots of time for you to go away and read, plenty of time for you to have a look at things over the summer. Don't worry about choosing a specific task yet. So don't worry about what am I actually going to do. What you really need to do is to just think, what are the things that I find interesting? What are the things that take me beyond the ordinary? What are the things that actually I'm engaged with? In terms of fiction, there's loads of suggestions. I've just put a few things down here, but there's lots of things that you might want to look at. Classic writers like Austen and Dickens and Woolf and Dostoevsky and Harper Lee and William Golding and Kurt Vonnegut and Chinua Achebe, really well known. Things Fall Apart, which is a novel about West Africa and the clash of colonial British culture coming in and destroying the tribal culture of the indigenous peoples of West Africa, like the Hausa and the Ibu and the Yoruba tribes. So again, looking at writing that goes beyond maybe looking at things from a colonial perspective, from a different perspective, that's always really good. Classic drama, Shakespeare, Dr. Faustus. Some of us watched a dramatization of part of the play of Dr. Faustus this year. So again, thinking about other playwrights. Chekhov, Beckett's a giant of 20th century drama, and there is some fantastic, I've got a collection of his short plays, which are very quick, very easy to read, very interesting, really engaging. Contemporary prize-winning fiction by prize-winning authors, so people who have won prizes in the past. So Ali Smith, I'm currently reading a book by Ali Smith, which is really worth looking at. Zadie Smith, Jonathan Coe, Ian McEwan, Hilary Mantel. These are just a few of the names that I'm sure you've come across, and people that happen to be lying around on my bookshelves. There's loads and loads of really interesting writers out there, and that will provide very different voices. So part of the joy of reading is that you can hear about life experiences and ideas and perspectives from a different point of view to your own. You're not stuck in just looking at things from the point of view that you have now, but you get the opportunity to see life from a different perspective. And that can be profound, interesting, disturbing, all of which is good. In terms of non-fiction, lots and lots of long-form journalism. So The Guardian I mentioned because it's free. There's lots of other places out there as well that you can get long-form. So by long-form journalism, I mean longer articles. You've got The Guardian, you've got things like the BBC. You can often get samples and extracts from places like The Spectator or New Yorker, or there's lots and lots of other really good quality long-form journalism out there, which you can normally get for free. Classic non-fiction, again, the great thing about things that are slightly older is that they're normally out of copyright, and so you can normally get them for free, and that's true of the fiction as well. But Orwell, Capote, Samuel Pepys's diary, again, brilliant. Anne Frank, many of you have seen that before, maybe had extracts of GCSE. Female Eunuch, Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. Those are all really, really good books. Contemporary non-fiction writers who are still writing today, like Bryson, Mary Beard, Brian Moore, Robert Peston. These are, and I've tried to include people from slightly different perspectives. So Brian Moore is a rugby writer. Robert Peston is really well known for writing about politics and economics. So his book, WTF, was one of the best sellers from a year or so ago. I'm trying to remember when it came out. And these books are, really, really interesting, but again, are giving us something from a different perspective, going beyond what we might already know. Okay, so what do we need to do next? Well, apart from reading lots, and you need to do lots of reading, start to think about what types of writing you enjoy reading, and maybe even enjoy writing. Have a go at writing the first half of a page of a story, a monologue, a report, a feature article, etc. Anything you like. Just have a go playing around at writing different bits of writing. Write about what your life is like now. Write about what your life is like now as a diary. Write about it as if it was a feature article. Just try different voices, different styles. Look at the genres. Look at the generic conventions of different types of writing. What do you need to follow in order to match those particular generic conventions? And try to find your voice. Try to be aware of what's different about you, and what can you bring to a text, to a task. How do the things that you've read shape your own writing? What might you choose as a stimulus text? Okay, so hopefully that's given you some ideas. This is just the starting point on what should be a really interesting and really fruitful task. And if you get involved with it and really bring some enthusiasm and energy to it, you've got every chance of getting a really good mark. Thanks for listening, and good luck.